Now we're ready to look at the California equivalent of the Federal Register and the Code of Federal Regulations. They are called the California Regulatory Notice Register and Barclay's official California Code of Regulations. Fortunately, we have both of these in print in the library. First, let's look at the California Regulatory Notice Register, which is the California equivalent of the Federal Register. There's a lot I could have included on this slide, but the two things you need to know are that the Notice Register is published every Friday. It's not published every business day like the Federal Register. And it contains the notices of proposed regulatory actions by state agencies to adopt, amend, or repeal regulations. There are also a few other notices that are published in this, but I don't think we really need to go into that kind of detail. This is the cover of one issue of the California Regulatory Notice Register from January of 2025. The table of contents begins right on the front page, and this is actually not all of it. It goes on a little bit to the next page. I'm going to open up a PDF next and just walk through this with you, but I kind of picked it because the very first thing here is the proposed new carry concealed weapon regulations. Now let me scroll down to the very first page of the content. Here is the first item that was in the table of contents starts. It's about the carry concealed weapons license. You can find out here that they are proposing to adopt certain sections of the California Code of Regulations, that there is not currently a public hearing schedule, but if one is requested, they will schedule one. Tells you about the written comment period and who to contact. And this is important because if you want to know what gives the agency authority to promulgate such regulations, here it is telling you the exact sections of the penal code where they've been given the authority. The most interesting part to me is this right here, where it tells you why they're doing it. And it's because of a U.S. Supreme Court case in which the court ruled that New York's requirement that a, quote, proper cause, unquote, must be demonstrated if you're going to receive a concealed carry permit. The court ruled that was unconstitutional, but it also ruled that it is constitutional for states to require such a permit or license in order to carry a weapon in public. In this paragraph, it tells you that California passed a new statute setting up new guidelines for the agency to require a permit. And here we have what the effects of the proposed rulemaking are likely to be, what the benefits are expected to be, comparable federal regulations, and so forth, until we get down here finally to contact persons regarding this if you wish to contact them. So this is the nature of what you will find. This is an actual proposed regulations, but it's an announcement that we're going to promulgate new regulations and would like comment on it. So this is an example of the kind of thing you will find in the register. If the notice register is the equivalent, the state equivalent of the Federal Register, then it's Barclay's official California Code of Regulations that is the state equivalent of the Code of Federal Regulations. We have Barclay's in our library, so here's a picture of what it looks like, the entire set. Here's a little bit more of a close-up to give you an idea of what the volumes look like. And finally, here's a close-up to show you what those labels look like. Before we look at how to find things in Barclay's, let's take a quick look at how it's organized. As you can see, it has 28 numbered titles. Each title has a name, and the regulations are organized, of course, under their relevant topic. So, for example, motor vehicle regulations are Title 13, and public safety regulations are Title 19. Now, normally at this point, I would be putting up the slide about the 4 approaches to legal research, and we talk about how to use the second and third approaches to find regulations, but let's do it backwards this time. First, I'm going to show you the regulations that we're looking for, and then we'll talk about how you could have gone about finding them. So suppose you're trying to find the regulations regarding the Safe Schools Assessment Program, and in particular, you want to know what the penalty is for either failing to submit required data or for intentionally submitting misleading data. So here we have the regulations promulgated by the Education Department about the Safe Schools Assessment Program. And if we scroll down through some of the sections, we'll find section 705, which addresses submitting false or misleading data. Now let's go take a closer look at section 705 before we continue. Now, the main reason I wanted to take a closer look at one of the sections so I could point out information about the enabling legislation. Hopefully you remember from a very early video that the administrative agencies can't promulgate regulations without the legislative body giving them authority. And so if you want to challenge a regulation, one way to do it is to argue that the agency didn't have the authority or that it exceeded its authority. So each regulation will show you the authority of the agency to promulgate it. Here you can notice under Note, it says Authority Cited, and it refers to several sections of the Education Code and the Penal Code. You could check those sections and then possibly argue that the agency exceeded the authority that it was given by the legislature. So let's talk about how you can find these regulations. Once again, we have the 4 approaches. Obviously, the first approach is the easiest. If you have the site, just go get it, and we don't need to talk about it anymore here. The 4th approach is the word search online, and since this particular video is about print research, we don't need to cover that. So let's look at how you might go about using the table of contents approach to find these regulations. Let me start by saying the table of contents approach is probably not the most effective way to go about this, unless you're already very familiar with the regulations promulgated by an agency so that you can easily find the right part. The table of contents is published twice. One, there's a master table of contents that has the table of contents for every single title altogether. And then there is an individual title table of contents at the beginning of each title. They're basically the same, so we only need to look at a table of contents once. The master table of contents can be found at the beginning of volume 1 of the Barclay set, and of course the title table of contents can be found at the beginning of the title. This is the table of contents for the education title. You can see it's 27 pages long, so I tried to pick something that would be relatively early in the table of contents. If you're using the run your finger down the page method of using a table of contents, you could eventually land right here to health and safety of pupils. So you look through the articles in health and safety of pupils, and you see that Article 7 is the Safe Schools Assessment Program. And it tells you that this starts in Volume 5, page 1-15. I'm not sure what the 1 stands for, but there is a page 15. And just as a reminder, here is the beginning of Article 7, the Safe Schools Assessment Program. And if we scroll down, we can see here the page number where it begins is Volume 5, 1-15. Now let's move on to the index approach. The master index to Barclays is in the last volume, so we're going to look at that. There's also something there called a table of statutes to regulations, which I think is definitely worth taking a look at. It's not exactly an index, it's a table, but it's kept with the index. In the index, the most obvious term to look up is schools. So I look for schools and I find a heading called Schools and School Districts. Under Schools and School Districts, I look for Safe Schools. here's a closer look. Under Safe Schools, I can see where the definitions are in Section 700, and the reporting requirements, which is what I'm interested in. Under Failure to Submit, it tells me Section 705, which is we've already looked at. The list continues in the next column, and it says falsification, also Section 705. So I'm pretty confident that the 700s in general and the 705 section in particular is what I'm looking for. Let's take a look at the table of statutes to regulations. Now what this does is if you already have a code section or sections, you can look in this table to find regulations that were promulgated pursuant to that code section. So for example, say you had a code section from the Health and Safety Code. You could go to this table, look up the Health and Safety Code, find that section number, and then it would give you a cross-reference to where in Barclays you would find any regulations that had been promulgated pursuant to that section of the Health and Safety Code. This is one page of the table, and I'm going to zoom in to the top of the page because you can't really see much here. Now you would locate the name of the code that you're interested in. In this case it's the legislative code. So if you're looking up the education code, you would go to the pages that have education across the top. And then you would look for the section number of the code that you're interested in. If, for example, you've found Education Code Section 14,044, and that's what you want to see if there have been any regulations promulgated pursuant to its authority, you would go to this table, and it's telling you that Title 5 in Barclays, Section 705, refers specifically to that code section. Now I think that's enough of an introduction for the purposes of these videos about how to use Barclays. But if you'd like some more information, I found this to be a really good source. So you could go here to learn more about Barclays and regulations if you wanted to.